Hello, everybody. I'm Judy Distler. This, I assume, is Senator Andrew Zwicker, Senator, New Jersey State Senator, 16th District, and co-author of the Freedom to Read Act, right? And this is Deb Guston, who's an attorney, lives in Teaneck, practices in Glenrock, and her specialties are related to adoption and LGBTQ and a whole long list of other things as well. But if I told you everything about all these people, we wouldn't get to the discussion, okay? And I finally learned how to pronounce Shinae's last name, and I hope I'll say it right. This is the director of the Teaneck Public Library, Shinae Hyun. Okay. And Teaneck is in the midst of a renovation right now, so we're on the move to other libraries. But I'm so happy that New Milford now has a Teaneck shelf, new books, shelves, because we have a very diverse selection of books in Teaneck. And before we get to the core of what this movie was about and what the situation is today, I just had to tell a little bit about myself in the public library and ask all of our panelists, maybe a Cliff Notes version, what's your earliest and fondest memory of a public library? When I was 7 years old and living in Brooklyn, we used to walk about 8 blocks, I guess, to Kings County Hospital that had a one-room public library. I don't know how it happened, but I could just go around from the children's section to the adult section. And I think by the time I was 10, I had finished Betsy, Tacy, and Tib. I had read Peyton's Place and Not as a Stranger. So, and I've loved libraries ever since. So how about you, Senator?
Thank Andrew.
Andrew. Okay.
Thank you, Judy. So this is kind of home for me. So even though the area I represent is Princeton and Central New Jersey area, I grew up in Englewood. And my father and stepmother lived in Teaneck for 30 years. So my earliest memory is I grew up in the Englewood Public Library. And as you were asking that question, what I remember the most wasn't a book, was those large square steps to go up to the second floor. I used to love running up those steps to go get whatever books were there. But I had to be every week in that library. My stepmother was a librarian for Fairleigh Dickinson, and my mother was a public school English teacher. So books were everywhere, and I spent all my formative years in a library.
Okay, Deb.
So I grew up in Oakland, and I'm probably among a rarer group of people who actually went K through 12 in the same school system. So our public library in Oakland was actually located in the very original Ponds Church, the Reformed Church. So it was a beautiful building, and it sits right next to the middle school. So a lot of my memories around my middle school time were finishing up school, and if I didn't have some activity after school, heading over to the library to finish out the day. And it was a beautiful building and tiny, so we were all kind of cramped together. Talk about community. we were all kind of cramped in a very small library until it was able to expand years later. So.
Shinae, where'd you start?
So I grew up in Korea. So the library system is very different in Korea when I was growing up. And I remember I was living in an apartment, and then this bus with the books will arrive. They opened up the doors. We walked inside the bus, and it was filled with different kids' books. So we'll take our turns to look through the books and shelves, and then I remember I found a book that I'd like to read, and it's like treasure hunting. That's really good memory.
Okay. All right, now we'll get to the tough stuff and what the film was about, in addition to showing us a fascinating history. And I think that the two words that we can take from it are valued and endangered, right? And with that in mind, what is the Freedom to Read Act? That it was passed in December, just this December, right?
Correct. So I'll give a very quick background and then tell you what it is. But New Jersey has one of the strongest freedom to read acts in the country, and I'm very proud of everybody who was involved in that, which included librarians and teachers and students and just people coming together across all of New Jersey. So that, first of all, the movie, and I will get more into it, was so beautiful, and I was getting very teary-eyed at the end, right? And just the importance of the freedom to read and the role of a library in all of our communities. 2 years ago, I went to a panel that was discussing these things, and I was very naive. I thought, this is New Jersey. We don't have an issue around book banning, right? And of course we did. And I met a remarkable person who, if there is an update when it comes to New Jersey and libraries, a librarian by the name of Martha Hickson. And Martha said no when someone tried to censor a book. And she was a librarian for North Hunterdon High School. And she received so much online abuse. Her car was vandalized, emails, horrible things. And I remember just sitting there, like, just shocked that this is happening here in New Jersey. So I went up to Martha after the panel, and I said, what can I do? And she told me at that point the only state in the country that had done anything was Illinois. Start there. And if Martha was here, she would tell you, she thought, oh, some politician came up to me and said, well, I'll never hear from him again. And about a month later, I emailed her and I said, okay, I have a draft of the bill. I need you to review it. And from that, we went through 18 months of meeting with stakeholders and changing it and making it specific to New Jersey. And so quickly, what it does is two things. It doesn't stop someone from challenging a book, but it standardizes it and says that every public library and public school library, if a book is challenged, then there's going to be a process that everyone has to follow. One of the key things that it did is it said, you can't be just anybody if you want to challenge a book in your local community. You have to be a member of that community. The Washington Post had done a study that said about 11 people were responsible for like 3/4 of all of the books that are being challenged in the country. They're going everywhere, right? So it did that. And then the final thing it did was it said, if you are a librarian and you are doing your job, you are immune from civil and criminal penalties of any kind. And of course that drove the opponents crazy. But a librarian has a right to do what they are trained to do. And so that is the New Jersey Freedom to Read Act.
Okay, then maybe this is, it sounds wonderful. But Deb, can the courts challenge it?
I don't think that it's something that is, when people challenge a law, there's two ways of challenging it. One is called facially, meaning on its face, this law is improper, illegal, unconstitutional. I don't think it's unconstitutional on its face. I think if somebody's going to challenge it, they're going to have to be someone who is impacted by the law, meaning that they're going to have to be someone who maybe is that outsider who tries to challenge a library, and they don't think it's right that they don't have the freedom to walk into the Teaneck Library and challenge a book if they live in Missouri. So I feel pretty good about this, and I also think that I think that when you have laws that standardize things, everybody adapts to them pretty well. And if something needs to be changed, they'll be knocking on the senator's door, and hopefully not knocking on the librarian's door.
So there couldn't be an executive order tomorrow that says you must remove these 500 books.
There can be.
That would get challenged. Can I quickly? So there was, after Governor Murphy signed the law in December, there was a civics complaint brought against me that somehow I had violated my civic duty by doing this, from opponents. That was quickly thrown out, and so there is a threat of a lawsuit, but as Deb pointed out, there are no grounds. I will say that there were, at one point in an earlier version, was something that was probably unconstitutional, but in all of those meetings, we realized that there was something there. And so we had constitutional lawyers working with us so that what we put on Governor Murphy's desk, you can challenge it, but it's not unconstitutional.
Yeah. Shinae, has there been anything specific in Teaneck? Any complaints about specific books?
So surprisingly, Teaneck, we had several complaints about the materials in our library, mostly it's about LGBTQ collection that we have. We have a big display every June to celebrate Pride Month. And ever since I started working, we've got a lot of phone calls about those books on display, and some people called our staff and complained and cursed and said that I'm gonna check out all the books that you have on display so nobody can borrow these books. And I told that patron, you're only helping that specific book to live on our shelves longer because now you're using it. That's all we did.
And Deb, you did some work with the Teaneck Library on dealing with this, I think?
Yeah, so Shinae and I worked together with the entire staff at the library, which is awesome. And we did a cultural competency training for the staff on LGBTQ issues. But what was more important than that was that we had a discussion about how a patron might come in to the library to challenge some material. And we tried to look at it from two perspectives. One, that they have a right to challenge the material. But number two, how do we diffuse the tension and make sure that the library staff feels safe, that there's a process for doing this, there are protocols. Some people can say, that's not my job, but let me show you to who is the person responsible for taking that. Asking people to fill out forms right then and there, rather than taking them home and musing over them for days and days, where they can come up with more and more reasons why the material might be challenged. So we kind of collectively built a process that we thought might help, number one, somebody who wants to challenge, understand the process, not be treated badly, but be treated politely, but also then making sure that they were not disrupting the library, threatening the staff, and hopefully trying to kind of chill people out a little, because sometimes a lot of this, and it was something that I, as Andrew said, I think I found this out while I was, preparing for this, is the books that people are challenging, they're not coming up with it on their own. They're reading a couple of published websites that have lists of books that have been brought up by somebody else, by some organization, and they're taking these lists and they're bringing them into their public library and saying, I want to challenge all of these. And it has nothing to do with that they've read something that might offend them, or their children might have had access to something that they don't think is proper. They found it on a website. So I think the library has a good protocol now that I think people feel comfortable with.
And there are lists of banned books, though, right? I don't know who wants to answer. So where did these lists come from? And I know that most libraries seem to have whole sections that say banned books, and there they are, and you can take them out.
I think it's from the history. Like in the past, those books used to be banned, but now we have access, so read.
Yeah, I don't know. You probably saw these all these
Sure.
published lists.
I've seen, just to give you a sense, I can't remember the exact year, but 20-something years ago, the most challenged book in the United States was Captain Underpants. I didn't make that up, because it was anti-authoritarian. And now, and Deb was getting to it, about 40% of the books that are challenged are LGBTQ plus themes. About another 40% have protagonists who are people of color, right? Or some combination of. So more than 80% of the books that are being challenged are one of those two things or a combination. If that doesn't tell you there's a political piece to it, nothing else will.
But are they challenged or banned? And if they're banned, what does it mean?
So in New Jersey,
It doesn't mean anything.
there has yet to be, even before the Freedom to Read Act was signed into law, there have been challenged books. Martha Hickson had said no to one of those.
Yeah.
But so far, in every community in New Jersey, the folks who have looked at that have kept the book on the shelf. All right? But that is the librarians, the bravery of the librarians. Part of the law was to give them the power of the law, and as Deb's talking about, to make sure the process was standard and was fair. The other thing about the freedom to read is, if a book is challenged under the law now, the book may not be taken off the shelf unless that challenge is successful. And another one is that if that challenge is not successful, you can't just challenge the same book over and over again.
Okay. Now, I just listened to an NPR program. It was fascinating because you actually heard the justices about the opt-out case that's now before the Supreme Court. And the feeling seems to be that the parents are going to win. Now, this is the case in Maryland where parents are now being denied the right to have their kids pulled out of classrooms if there are book discussions about topics they don't like or books they don't like. And the feeling is that the court will side with the parents, which will open up an enormous can of worms, right? What'll happen?
Well, I listen to the arguments too, and I do think that there's going to be, and I think that the court's going to authorize parents to be able to opt out. I think the problem with that is not that they get to opt out. I think the problem is that eventually these communities are going to realize that opting out is no way to run a school. And my fear is that not that these kids will not be exposed to these books, but that eventually the havoc that's being wreaked by kids opting out is going to end up removing the books from the classroom because the disruption is going to be too significant. I think this, but again, I think like everything in this country, we have to, sometimes our culture across the board takes the hardest route first and then figures out how to get back to some sensibility. So but I do think that school system's going to have some disruption. I don't know, maybe they will pull those books out of the classroom because it is too disruptive, or maybe they'll just stick to their guns.
But by the time I finished that program, I thought to myself, I'm so glad I'm not on the Supreme Court. It's not easy.
I wish you could be on the Supreme Court, given some of the folks.
That's right.
It's not easy. The other subject and I've also read recently, and it's mentioned in the film, that rural libraries are suffering, small town libraries are suffering more than any others. What's the solution? Where's the funding going to come from? Any answers? Does the state have enough?
I guess I'll start there. Yeah. I also have been fighting for, I obviously have a strong affinity for libraries personally and professionally. I've been fighting to ensure that funding from there's a combination, right? There's federal funding, obviously that is under extreme risk right now with this administration, and then there's state funding. And so I've been trying to do everything I can both to make sure that we keep the state funding going, but also that we put in place ways that libraries can save money, and so that in both sides, money's coming in, but they can do a bunch of things to save money through either legislation or the budgetary process.
Shinae, what's the source of funding? A lot of it is local too, isn't it?
Correct. In New Jersey, 95% is from the local government. So I'm not really worried about in Teaneck because we have a very supportive town residents, but you never know because, the 2008-9, a lot of towns had really hit with the budget crisis, and that's when a lot of libraries had to cut their staff hours and etc. And I think we get from the state, we get the state aid funding that's got cut a lot at that time, and I don't think it got restored at the same level right now. We're still lower than what we used to get from the state. Funding is really something that we cannot control. luckily in New Jersey, we have the law that towns, municipalities should fund the library if it's a municipal library, that we have a minimum funding level called 1/3 of mil. So there is a mandated funding level. But I sometimes wonder, the towns that are funding the library just at the minimum level, is that enough? You give the library minimum funding level and tell the library director, you run the library with the minimum funding that the law requires. That should be enough. Is that really enough?
Right. You have to attract people like Alec Baldwin to move to Teaneck, right? Because there's a children's library out on Long Island that he helped build. That's what we need, okay? So tell your rich relatives.
I mean, I will want to add that we have a group called Friends of the Teaneck Public Library who does a wonderful, wonderful fundraising to support our programs and other services.
Okay. And what, I know that libraries have changed. So, I mean, we haven't seen some of the things that we saw in this film, but can we get a list of what is a library today, in addition to books? There's so much.
Well, a lot of people think the library is books, but it's not anymore. We are changed. We are really center of the community, the heart of the community. Why? Some people just want to walk in and sit down, have a space. Sometimes, I hear some people say the library is third living room. We are people's living room. You don't have to pay any money. You want to go to coffee shop and sit there, you have to buy drinks. You have to spend your own money. But at the library, anybody can come in and spend time there. We don't kick out people for no reason. You can borrow books, you can sit, grab a newspaper. Some people just come in to talk to our staff members. You walk in and meet your other neighbors. You have, keeping up with them, and you ask people, what are you doing? And we offer different programs to people together. And this is just more than about resources. It's about caring about each other. We build the communities.
We saw in this film, cases of censorship and book burning, and what do each of you recommend? I don't know, maybe it's the same thing. What can the public do? What can we do to take action? What's the best way to take action to stop it? Can it be stopped?
Oh, that's a hard question. I don't know, be aware what we're doing, pay attention, show up for the council meetings, library board meetings. Your opinion matters. I always feel like, okay, I'm running the library based on the need and the demand of the community, our residents. So I think people should know what's going on. And if you show up at the council meetings or library events to show your support, I really appreciate your help.
And I think, like Shinae, intimated before about this one particular objector to these books, take out books that you never would read in a million years. Support the books, support the collection, because the more people, who are interested in a topic or interested in a particular book, the more that the library is going to know that it needs to be there. And that helps them figure out these issues and suggest new titles and new topics. And I'm sure that would be very welcome. I certainly know that in Shinae's library.
Just playing off of what Deb said quickly, I'll say when I first got into this, started doing the research to write up the legislation, I bought two books that are the two most challenged books. This book is Gay and Genderqueer. Both of those are unbelievably beautiful, emotionally raw, honest books about an individual's journey through life. And James Baldwin talks so beautifully about how he was finding himself on the pages of the books that he was taking out, and that's what those books are about. And of course, that is what some folks are trying to stop from happening. To the specific question, I would say this. I mean, we're fortunate to live in New Jersey, given what is clearly, I'm just going to be very political now, what is clearly an attack on democracy, clearly an attack on freedom of expression, clearly an attack on freedom of thought. Back to where I started my original comments, when Martha Hickson was being, her car being vandalized and horrible things being said about her online and to her face, that book, which I believe was genderqueer, it was either genderqueer or This Book is Gay, that she was defending, hundreds of people in her local town came out to support her. So to your point, right? She felt so alone when she was standing up to a few small number but very vocal minority of folks. But she said she was brought to tears when she looked around the auditorium and there were just hundreds of people there to support her and support the freedom to read. And so I agree. We have to stay vigilant because it happens all the time, right? In ebbs and flows.
Yeah, I was kind of interested after I listened to the Supreme Court argument. I went on Amazon to look at the titles that were being challenged. And you know what? They're all out of print now. You have to. It's a 1 or 2 month wait while they issue a new printing. And then I saw, one of them had a used one that was available, so I quickly put it in my shopping cart, and by the time I went to check out, somebody else had bought it. So, I mean, that's the response to this around the country, which I think is awesome.
Okay. One thing that Senator Loretta Weinberg said to me recently, or not just to me, but there was another showing of her film. What?
She's a good friend. Where is she?
She lives not far from
here.
You
I know.
can
I've
stop
been to
in
her
and
place.
See her. She said, don't sign petitions. Call or write to your senators and your. How do you feel about that? But apparently, that's far more effective if you want something to happen. Rather than, I must get 10 requests for me to sign something every day, and then they want my money too. So, but make a phone call.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll say very quickly, if I get petitions, all the language is the same, then I have staff say to me, you got 100 in support of X, right? If I get an email that is a form letter, then staff will also say you got it. But if I get an email that is clearly written from somebody, then my staff will read it first, but they will send things along to me. A phone call, same sort of thing. And of course, if you can, a personal conversation with a member, talking about personally why something, whether it's book banning or anything else, means to you is the most powerful thing.
I thought one thing in this film, and we'll get to questions from the audience soon, that was fascinating was that family with the woman who wanted, 20 children. And she had 14 and one on the way. But she didn't like the book, but she did not leave the library. Mm-hmm. And the book didn't, And sometimes, I don't want to sound my age and a little conservative, but sometimes some of these books, I think, do you now I know you have a choice. You don't have to take that book out for your child. And I guess that's the answer. But I was surprised that her feeling was, it's a faith-based family, that she didn't like the book, but she wasn't making any noises about it, and she certainly wasn't leaving the library.
So when we buy the books, we have our guidelines called collection development policy. We just don't buy the books because we like them. That's not how we purchase books. We follow the guidelines, and our professional librarians are trained to follow these guidelines. These guidelines are developed with the library board of trustees who runs the library with me. So I do not report directly to the mayor and council. I work with library board of trustees who are appointed by the mayor. Mayor also serves on the library board, but the mayor only gets one vote. It's a collective decision that our citizens are making. So when you look at the collection development policy, it kind of clearly states that we have to have a variety of ideas and covers all areas of different subjects.
And this must be different town by library, right? Because as I told you, I noticed now I'm going to New Milford Library while Teaneck is closed, that their collection of new books is not the same as Teaneck's collection of new books.
I mean, over the years, we get to learn what our patrons love to read, what they are wanting to read, and different demands. So over the years, our librarians get to know the community, and we tend to purchase more books, depending on the need. But also at the same time, our space is limited, so we cannot buy everything that we want to buy. So what we tell people, if you have a specific book, we can order it and get it from other libraries. We have this huge network that we can get books from California.
Okay. And questions from the audience?
Hi, I'm Sandy Silverberg, and I'll tell you a couple of specific things. I'm president of the Friends of the Library. And if you want to get involved, that's one way to do it. Join the Friends of the Teaneck Public Library, even if you're not a Teaneck resident, or join the Friends of the Library in your own town. The Friends is an organization that advocates for the library, is a supporter of the library, shows up at the budget meetings and to discuss exactly what's going on in Teaneck. I want to say that I've said for years, the library is the last bastion of democracy. We, the Friends of the Library, were the first people in the town of Teaneck to protest banning books. So if you want to get involved, that's the organization that's out front. We're a private organization, a 501c3. So if you're active, you want to be active, join the Friends of the Library.
What happens when a book is challenged?
Okay, the question is, what happens when a book is challenged?
So Deborah and I worked to standardize those processes into 2023, and we have reconsideration policy that clearly states what the processes are. So there is a form for residents. If you have an issue with a specific title, they can fill out those forms. It actually has all the check marks that have to check off, like you read this collection development policy, you read the book entirely, not just a section of it. They have to enter the library card, so we want to make sure you live in Teaneck. So there are things that we require, and then I received the complaint form. I discuss it with our librarians who purchased the book. We investigate the title, and then that I actually respond to the patron who complained about the title. I actually worked with Deborah at one point about reclassifying one titles. Yeah, and usually they have a chance. They receive the response from me, and then if they are not satisfied with my response, they have a chance to go to an appeal to the Board of Trustees.
Yeah, one of the most important things in my mind when we were revamping this was to make sure that the person who was challenging the material did two things. One, that they certified that they'd read it or viewed it. Because that way now they're certifying it. I don't know whether they're really telling the truth or not, but we're challenging them to sign something that says, I'm certifying, I'm telling the truth here. And the second thing was making sure that they had access to the acquisition of rules that the library follows when they purchase the material, and to understand that all the material there was carefully vetted before it even came into the library, and then it was meeting the needs of some or all of the community. We were hoping to be able to make some people reconsider their request for reconsideration by putting them through a little more rigorous complaint process.
Have there been many challenges? Or just phone calls?
Formal complaint
challenge.
was just one.
Just one?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you think that this Supreme Court case would have a huge impact on libraries, not just schools?
So that the specific case is about this whole idea of the school has to give notice so they can not send their child to class. Just to be clear, in New Jersey right now, any parent, for any reason, can make a request to keep a child out of class. They want advance notice to cause that's where the havoc will come in. Also, let's be clear, in a school library, any parent can go to a school librarian and say, I don't want my child to have access to a certain book. right? This is all about whether or not that same parent gets to say that same thing for you and your family, right?
In New Jersey, a parent can say, I want my child pulled out of class while this is...
All for years.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
In my opinion, and I'm not a librarian, every single book in a library, and it's what you were alluding to, has been determined, bought, and purchased by an individual trained to not only that it's an appropriate book for the library, but it's an age-appropriate book. We've trusted librarians for as long as there have been libraries to make those decisions. And I strongly believe as a legislator and as a parent that we must continue to do that and allow access to whatever a librarian deems appropriate to be in a library for anybody.
Isn't it ironic, though, that we're talking about books and kids getting access to books, and look at the internet, and look at social media, and look at TikTok, and they have access to everything by the time they're 10 years old, probably earlier than that.
Just one more quick thing. So, like when we did the hearings on the Freedom to Read Act, right? People showed up with giant poster boards of a single page of a book that was sexually explicit in a high school, high school section, blah blah blah, right? But someone pointed out, they would say these books are obscene, right? And it's right, okay. So they are deeming it's obscene. There's very specific laws about what is obscene. But if librarians are giving obscene material to minors, then they're breaking the law, and librarians are not being arrested for allowing age-appropriate books into their libraries. So it's just, again, it's that I'm not comfortable, is what someone's saying, with something here because it's involving sex or homosexuality or whatever it might be, and therefore I want to make a decision for everybody else.
I want to add one thing, funny story. A lot of young parents of younger kids, they're so proud of their kids are so advanced reading levels. So they're trying to come to me and I say, can you recommend a book for my kid? And he's very, very advanced reader, so he can read a young adult title. And I'm like, no. It's not about your reading level, the kids' reading level. It's about their experience. There are some content and subject in that book that may not be appropriate for a young child. So we are trying to categorize our materials accordingly. So, I mean, it can be, they want to, give these books that about their depression, about like things they are not experiencing right now, and in second, third grade, try to give those titles because they're simply high advanced readers. So that's.
But aren't a lot of? I remember when my husband had retired and he was volunteering, or maybe he was subbing for a while, and he was in a kindergarten class and reading a book to the children, and he couldn't believe it. It was so sad. It was an Indian village, and people were killed, and the village was burned down. And then on the last page, I think the one remaining little girl was going to lose her doll, the only thing she had left. He changed the ending of the story. And that is a true story.
I think you said earlier that when kids want to check stuff out, it depends on whether the parents. But there must be some age at which kids can go to the library and check stuff out without their parents being there. So how does it work when a kid tries to check out something that somebody might think is not age appropriate, but the parent's not actually there?
The kids older than age 14 can stay and come at the library alone, and they bring their own library card.
Right.
But when they get the library card, we require parents' signature on their library card application. So ultimately, the parents have the responsibility on their kid's account. So if they want to put their email addresses or a second phone number or email addresses, they can check what the kid is checking out.
Thank you to everyone on the panel and to the library for co-sponsoring, for all that you've done, for all that you will do. And remember, come to the film festival for its 20th year, and keep on coming to the Puffin and keep on going to the library.
Thank you.